You see it, Orlana?
Now I do. Okay, stand by.
Mayor. Nothing like that? Or my thing. What do I hit?
Okay, we are live on Mount Ararat.
And I want to put in my things.
Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in about 2 minutes.
This is going to be fun.
Good morning.
Good morning, Laura.
Morning.
Afternoon, I'm sorry.
Afternoon. Laura, I'm going to put you on mute for now.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Welcome, everyone, to Mount Ararat Counseling Center's Mental Health Awareness Month, second webinar. We are really excited that you could join us today. We have a lot of going on in our society with what I call a double pandemic. We have COVID-19, and then we also have the pandemic of racial injustice. And today's topic, coping with grief and loss during the COVID-19 pandemic, we can also talk about coping with grief and loss as it relates to racial injustices. And this, what's going on in our society, can trigger feelings of grief and loss. So we feel like this webinar is right on time and a timely topic. Our facilitator today from Mount Ararat Counseling Center is Kathleen Hunt. She has a Master's of Education and received her degree in Rehabilitation Counseling from the University of Pittsburgh, as well as her Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. She was the Community Counseling Program Team Leader at Family Services of Western Pennsylvania, where she supervised and evaluated community therapists, as well as coordinated services provided by the therapists. Ms. Hunt's previous experiences include working as an Employee Assistance Program Specialist and Team Leader, serving as the Clinical Director of a Chemical Dependency Program, and working as a therapist with a mental health, mental retardation center. Currently, Kathleen consults with family foundations through the Office of Child Development at the University of Pittsburgh. And we are honored to have Ms. Kathleen Hunt with us today. And Kathleen, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Tinsley. Good afternoon, everyone. As Dr. Tinsley stated, I am going to be talking about managing your grief during this pandemic. But before I start, I'm going to be a little transparent. I want to tell you how this affected me when it first started. When I first heard about the coronavirus that was supposedly originated in China, I didn't think much about it, to be honest. The virus was in China, miles away from me and from the United States. And I didn't think that it would get here. But then on January 2020, needless to say, China did have the virus, and I no longer felt that I was exempt. But on December 31st, 2019, the government of Wuhan, China, confirmed that they had some casualty in terms of people being infected with the virus. On January 11, 2020, they also reported their first casualty from the virus. But then on January 20th, other countries, including United States, reported confirmed cases of this disease. At this point, I knew I was no longer exempt. I really did not feel that the virus would come all the way over to the United States, to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But at that time, I realized that I was in it just like with everyone else. So now I realize that our world as we know it may never be the same due to this virus, which is the beginning of taking over basically not only our country, but over our lives, because our lives are now different. I now see my surrounding and realizing that I have to change because my surroundings have changed. And when I started to notice this, I also had to question myself. Do I want to change? Can I change as a result of this quote, new normal? I needed to change in order to cope with everything that was happening around me. People were being laid off or asked to work from home. Schools were closing. Businesses were shutting down. We were directed by the governing officials to stay at home. And if we needed to go out, we needed to wear masks. This was all new to me. And at some point, I had to recognize that I was beginning to feel something that I could not identify at that point. So what I want you to do and think about this during this presentation is that as we talk about grief, loss, and stress, I want you to begin to hopefully recognize some things. Now, as I talked earlier about the changes, we are now beginning to enter a new normal. And I want you to begin to think, and I'm going to pause after I ask this question, and if you want to write something in the comments box, you can. Think about this period of being in this pandemic. What have you lost? And when I talk about loss, it's not just about a loss of a death, a person, but what have you lost? Have you lost relationships? Have you lost a sense of who you were? Have you lost maybe a marriage, friendship, how you see yourself? And this is something I realized as I was doing or writing up this presentation. This may be something that we never really think about. When we think about the pandemic, we think about all the people who died, that we lost. But individually, take this moment and think about what you lost. And if you're willing to type in that information in the box, fine. So I'm just going to pause right now. All right, I hope you had time to be able to do that. And let me say this, for me, when I stopped and really thought about this, what I recognized that I lost is a loss of a sense of my identity, in a sense in who I was. In terms of work, work was a big part of my identity. oh, I'm a therapist, I'm this. But I also recognize that I lost of a sense of freedom because I was confined to stay in the house and confined. And when I did go out, I was confined to do certain things. So hopefully this helped you. What I'm going to do now is to go on and talk about the grief, stress, and loss. And one of the things I want you to understand is that when we talk about loss, loss is connected with grief. So let me do this. Just stand by. Okay. Second. The next one, please. All right, when we look at loss, and loss is defined as this. Loss can be defined as a state of feeling of grief when deprived of someone or something of value. Along with loss comes grief. And if you think of it, as I was just talking about, what did you value that you feel that you have lost as a result of this pandemic? And as you think about that, and as you begin to feel that sense of loss, it goes into grief. And that's okay. Anytime you're feeling any of these emotions, it is okay. Stress. Now, I do believe that we all have been somewhat stressed out as a result of this pandemic. And when we talk about stress, it can be defined as a mental state or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. Some common symptoms of stress are frequent headaches, jaw clenching, neck ache, back pain, cold, sweaty feet, hands, rashes. As you can see, it's a number of things that you can go through as a result of stress. Depression, decreased appetite, nightmares, loneliness, and worthlessness. The effects of stress are wide-ranging regarding emotions and behavior. Equally important, but less appreciated, are the various systems that stress affect, our organs and tissues all over our bodies. And again, we can feel that when we're stressed. Headaches, that's one thing that I have, headaches. When you're stressed, you're short-tempered, the hostility. So again, it's very important, especially in this day and time, to understand what you're going through and also what you're feeling at this point. Uh-oh, sorry. I got it. And the next, sorry about that. Okay. The next one we're going to talk about is grief. Now, when we talk about grief, and let me say this, grief is a natural response to loss. It's the emotional suffering when you feel someone or something you love is taken away. As I said, most of the time we think of a death, but pinpoint what you feel has been taken away from you as a result of this pandemic. Often the pain of the loss feels very overwhelming. During this time, you may experience all kinds of difficulties and unexpected emotion, shock. I don't like this, danger, disbelief. Maybe you feel guilty and sadness. And with grief comes sadness. The pain of grief can also disrupt your physical health, making it difficult to eat, sleep, or even think straight. And I think all of us have went through some of this. Let me let you know that This is all normal. Everything that we just talked about is a normal reaction to loss. Again, loss. And a lot of times, as I said before, we have a hard time pinpointing what we lost. I feel something, but I don't know what it is, and I don't know why I feel this way. And it's due to us being unable to pinpoint what that loss is for us. The more significant the loss, the more intense your grief will be. Again, let me say that. The more significant the loss, the more intense your grief will be. A loss of a mother, father, child may be more intense than maybe losing a dog or your job. Grieving the loss of a loved one can be the most intense type of grief, but any loss can cause grief. And let me say this, because I hear people say this. How I grieve is okay. Everyone grieves differently. And even though my loss may not be as significant as your loss, I still can react at the same level. And sometimes I think people don't understand that, because they'll say, well, I lost my mother, you just lost a job, or you just lost whatever. And I really don't think you can compare the grief, or because how I grieve and what I'm grieving about is just as important as what you're grieving about. Now, when we talking about grief, how do you deal with the grieving process? And it's not an easy process, and I'll admit that. And as I said, everyone grieves differently. First of all, you have to acknowledge your pain. A lot of times when we're grieving, we don't want to deal with the pain. We just want the pain to go away. But acknowledging I'm hurting, it's okay. So to acknowledge the pain that you have regarding the loss is also very helpful. Because if I know that I'm in pain due to this, it gives me a way to deal with it. Accept that grief can trigger many different and unexpected emotions. Anger, resentment, even in a sense, jealousy. You know, why me? I don't like this person. I don't want to be with this person because they have their mother and I don't. So understand that is also part of the grieving process. Understand that your grieving process will be unique to you. And I really want to emphasize this. Your grieving process will be unique to you. How you grieve, as I said, is how you grieve. Each person grieves differently. Again, I can remember when my grandmother died, and I was about 6 or 7 years old. And I vividly can remember how people were grieving around me, crying and everything. But as a child, I didn't understand it. And so the way I grieved was that for me, it was the memory of my grandmother that kept me going. So again, my grief process was different than some of my other family, how they grieve. So understand, it's a process and it will be unique to you. The fourth thing is seek out face-to-face support from people who you care about. Support yourself emotionally by taking care of yourself physically. Recognize the difference between grief and depression. Now, grief is the loss, dealing with the loss of someone. When we talk about depression, and I do believe I have a slide here. Oh, I think. Oh. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, I thought I had a slide there, but as I said, you recognize the difference between grief and depression. But when we talk about depression, depression is where you are having a hard time dealing with your emotions. And when we talk about depression, we're talking about not feeling well with yourself. You don't have the energy to do some of the things that you will want to do. Also, it can be a state where it immobilizes you, basically. You can't function. You don't want to function. You don't want to cook. You don't want to hear the kids. You don't want to go to work. You don't want to do this. So depression, it can be a state where you are immobilized to do anything. Your thought processes are different. So again, when we look at all of this, when we talk about the pandemic, we have to remember that we're in a state that we've never been before. And you need to be gentle with yourself. And when I say this, don't be hard on yourself, because this is a new environment for us. What was new, what was familiar for us before the pandemic is now gone. So as I said before, our new normal is something that we are going to need to address. And it's not going to be easy. How many of you like changes? How many of you are able to deal with changes? So those little things that we learn how to change can help us. But right now, this world that we're in, these are big changes. I now have to learn how to work the computer a little better than what I'm doing now. You know, some of us have to learn how to work with our kids in terms of homework. And all of this goes back to being stressed out. So when you're trying to do something that you don't know how to do, you don't want to do it, stress. So how do you deal with that? It can go through anger, but when you're angry, then it upsets you. And this goes on to, you know, and I hate to say this, but it can also turn into violence. The stress, the violence, the depression. So all of this that we're experiencing at this point is something that we need to begin to learn. As I said, acknowledging the pain, face to face, grieving, support yourself emotionally and taking care of yourself. So when we do this, it is very helpful for each of us. Go ahead. When we talk about grief, the 5 stages, and some of you already know this. The first stage is denial. This can't be happening to me. It really can't. You know, and when we talk about denial, and when I'm looking at this, the 5 stages of grief, denial can also be in the stage of loss. I don't believe I lost this job. I don't believe that my husband walked away from me. So again, as I said, loss and grief goes together. So denial is the first thing, because I don't want to deal with this. It's too hard, it's too painful. The second stage is anger. I don't want to deal with this. And then it begins, why is this happening to me? We ask that question and then we begin to answer it. Why is this happening to me? Is it because I'm a bad person? Is it because I did something wrong? And it goes on and on and on. And with the denial and the anger, and it builds up in us. It builds up in us. And again, you think, okay, I went through denial. Now I'm going through anger. Now we're going to bargain. this make this not happen. In return, I'll do X, Y, and Z. We bargain to deal with the pain that we're experiencing. I don't want to deal with this. And let me stop here. Don't think that because once you go through the 5 stages of grief, that everything is going to be okay. Because you can go from denial to even acceptance, but then you can go back to the anger. So it's not just, okay, it's very linear. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm done. I'm good. I got this. No, because when you're feeling good and you think you got everything under control, something may happen to snap you back and you'll find yourself being angry and you'll sit there and say, what happened? What's wrong with me? So again, these are just stages, and it doesn't mean that once you go through the 5 stages, you're going to be fine. It's going to be okay. The other one is depression. Excuse me, as we talked about, too sad to do anything. I lost my job, lost my husband. I can't do this. Why? I don't want to do anything. This is too hard for me. So as I said, that state of depression keeps you from moving, whether it's moving physically or mentally. So in a sense, you're in I'll call it a vegetative state. You're just there. You're not able to do. And even in that state of depression, a lot of feelings are going on inside of you. And the other stage is acceptance. And let me say this. This is a hard stage, I do believe. For people who are grieving, it's hard. I remember seeing on television where, and I forget what state it was, I'm not sure if it was New York or another state. I remember the newscast talking about taking the bodies of those people who have died from the virus and putting them in graves. They were all together, one after another. It was just I remember them just laying the bodies there, and not knowing who they are, and acceptance. I wasn't at peace when I saw that. So even in terms of the grief, there are times that it's hard. And I have heard people say, it's hard for me to accept that my mother, my father, my child, it's hard for me to accept that I lost my job, my husband left, or any of those losses. It can be hard to accept it. And how do you get there? I don't have any magic wand to tell you. It takes time. It takes time to get to that point of accepting the loss. It may take years. For everybody, it's different. And please, in this hour or this time when you're grieving or have lost, please do not try to, how do I want to say that? Compare yourself to how other people are coping with it. Because if you do that, especially if you're depressed, guess what's going to happen? You're going to beat yourself up and you're going to say, what's wrong with me? Cheryl is doing better than I am, so there must be something wrong with me. So just recognize that at this point, as I said, with the pandemic, things are different. Things are different. And one way to help you to get through this is, first of all, I want you to begin to say to yourself, I want you to say to yourself, even though you don't feel it, I'm okay. I'm okay. I may not be where I want to be or the best place where I want to be, but I'm okay for this time. And that will be helpful to understand and to feel that there is an opening, there's a space, there's a place that you can sit in. And part of that is just focusing on not just the grief or the hurt or the loss, but begin to reflect on who you are. Begin to reflect in terms of, okay, I feel this way, I have these losses, I'm upset, I'm stressed. What can I do? One of the best things I can tell you to do is to do you, is to begin to take care of yourself. However that is for you. If it means going out for a walk, even if it's for 15 minutes or 5 minutes, do it. I'm too depressed. Yes, you're depressed, but walk anyway. Do something that you enjoyed in the past that may make you feel better about your particular situation. Call people. Again, with this pandemic, we've been restricted. But one of the things is that you can call someone who you know will listen to you. Sometimes it just takes a good listening ear to help you to feel better, that someone is willing to sit on that phone and just allow you to talk about what's going on with you. So again, as I said, when we talk about the grief, the denial, the anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, this is it. This is just a roadmap, but it's not the end of what you'll be going through. And we talked about the new normal. How will it be? I don't know. But one thing I do know is that we talked about loss. That's one of our biggest loss. The loss of who we were prior to this pandemic, the loss of how the world, and I'll put it that way, was prior to this. And for us, it can throw us into anger. It can throw us into depression. And as I said earlier, do I want to change? Maybe not, but do I need to? Yes. And how do I do that? And part of that is looking at how do I get over these loss? How do I begin to walk and to recognize that, yeah, this is not how I want it to be, but I think I can manage it. I'll try. So again, it's really important for us to recognize what's going on inside of us. And the other thing I want to tell you is that you're not alone in all of this. You are not alone. All of us, and I'm including myself, struggle with this new norm. And yes, I have thoughts of how is it going to really be? And I'll tell you the truth, I really don't know. But one thing I do know is that if I reach out to someone to talk to, if they are willing to listen, that helps. But also, if you are really feeling that you need help, there are professional counselors that you could get in contact to get help. The three things I do want to leave you with is three things. I want you to allow yourself to feel the loss once you're able to identify it. And this is why I asked you to look at and to think about what you have lost as a result of this pandemic. Allow yourself to feel the loss and to acknowledge it. Feel it and acknowledge it. The second thing I want you to do is to be able to reach out to someone who is willing to listen to you and to acknowledge your pain. Reach out to someone who will be able to listen to you and acknowledge your pain. And I say acknowledge your pain. I'm not saying that that person is going to agree with everything, but just to be saying, yes, I hear what you're saying. I hear that you're hurting. That's the acknowledgement. And the third thing is to remember that you are not in this alone. Everyone, whether you really think it or not, everyone is going through something. So remember that you are not in this alone. So again, those are the three things that I really want you to think about. And I am not sure if there was any questions or comments in the box, Reverend Tinsley.
Yes. I've been communicating with someone on Facebook. Can you share how we at the Mount Ararat Counseling Center marry biblical and psychological foundations within the grief process?
Well, go ahead, Dr. Tinsley. You may answer that question.
All right. And I think based on what we do at Mount Ararat Baptist Church, we marry theological and biblical foundations. When somebody comes to us, if they want to incorporate scripture and into the process, but what we do is we use psychological principles to help someone transform their mind so that they can increase their faith. They can mature their faith, because what may go on in the world may cause someone to question their faith or postpone developing their faith. And so our philosophical approach at Mount Ararat is we have to work together. So when we come from biblical perspectives, yes, God, we might say pray about it, and we want you to pray about it, but God may say, I'm placing a trained professional, a clinical professional, to help you work through this process. And so we weave in based on where the individual is at in terms of the biblical foundations. So we're going to weave in evidence-based counseling strategies along with scripture and theology.
Okay. There's a question. How do you mobilize and start again? How do you mobilize and start again? In terms of, I assume when you're talking about that, the changes that are maybe taking place in our society, how things will be different after or during this pandemic. The thing, how do you mobilize? I'm gonna say this, and this is just coming from me and my thoughts. First of all, for me to mobilize myself to get into it, I have to recognize what it is. I need to recognize what it is. And depending on what it is, then I have to make some decisions. Do I want to do this? And if I do I want to just jump into it, or am I going to walk through it? So that's how I believe you can mobilize it, but also begin to, as I said, look at how other people are doing, but also reach out, because it's not going to feel that comfortable. This is new. I don't even know how it's going to feel. I don't even know how, when I start back to work, how it's going to feel and what I'm going to need to do differently in my job. So, and I thought about that. I'm like, am I going to be able to go into people's homes? We're green now, but do I want to? So again, these are some of the things to begin to think about that will help you to mobilize and start again. And I'm not talking about, running, boom, just going, but taking your time, taking it one step at a time, but also be aware of how you're feeling as you're taking those steps. So that's what I think about, mobilizing and starting again. And if Dr. Tinsley, if you have anything to say, please.
Yes, and I want to say the process of mobilize. Here's one of the things I think people have to realize. When you move through those 5 stages of grief, there is no timeline.
That's right.
Somebody could be in that shock denial stage for years until they are ready to be able to work through the pain and emotion of grief. So unfortunately, we live in a society where it's hard, people have a hard time talking about grief and loss. And so shouldn't you be over that by now? Hasn't it been long enough? And we cannot put a timeline to grief. So if you say, you know what, I'm not ready to go through the pain and emotions of grief right now. I'm good where I'm at. It is okay, accept and acknowledge, as Kathleen said, where you are. And if we add one other piece to this process, there's the stages of grief, but there's also the task of mourning. And part of the task of mourning is accepting the loss. And that's a hard concept for people to say, I have to accept that I just lost this person, or I have to accept that I just lost this job. But part of accepting it is more of a cognitive perspective, because then it allows you to feel the pain and emotion of the loss. And, you know, most people don't like pain and emotion, so they might want to self-soothe, overwork, you know, drinking in moderation, medication. So it's really important to allow yourself to go through the pain and emotion, but not get stuck. And then part of the grief process is redefining your identity, as Kathleen said. Who you were with the person or with the job or with the lifestyle is going to be different as afterwards. So you have to redefine your identity. Who am I now with this loss? And then finally, you got to find an enduring connection with your loss. How are you going to honor the person or the loss that you have? So just know there's work to be done. And when you talk about mobilizing, sometimes people want to take a break from the work, and it is okay. Just don't get stuck.
Thank you. Someone wants to have us comment. Can you comment on grief response when we experience loss on a global scale, like the recent murder of George Floyd? I thought this is very interesting because I was listening to the news this morning. I saw all the, the riots and everything like that. And I sat up and I was like, oh my goodness, what's going on? And I understand, the anger, but what I also began to understand, and as a result of this pandemic, we have lost so much of who we are, our identity, feelings, anger. And when I saw what was going on, I did begin to wonder, because we've been so sheltered, in place, was this a time for us to let everything out individually and in terms emotionally? I've been pinned up in this house for how many weeks, 10 weeks or whatever. I've been limited to this. I've been, was that a way for people to deal with those emotions and just let out? In terms of, yes, it was the looting and the burning, but I really did think about that this morning in terms of what we are going through and what happened and how it all married together, that we are seeing what we're seeing. So I think it's part of the loss. So, yeah.
Can I add something to that, Kathleen?
You sure can.
When we talk about also what's happening globally, when we talk about this double pandemic from COVID, and then also what's going on with the murders, the racial injustices, you have to understand this COVID and these racial injustices are traumatic events. And traumatic events can result in post-traumatic stress syndrome. And there's also a concept called race-based traumatic stress. And it is the emotional pain that somebody may feel after experiencing racism or microaggressions or oppression. And so it is normal to go through the pain and emotions of anger, sadness, frustration. Those are all common emotions. And so part of the process is engaging in self-care and giving yourself time to work through the multiple layers. So when I think about grief, you can be grieving multiple situations at once. So think about grief like layers of an onion. So you could be grieving what's happened with George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery, or you could be grieving the loss of a job, and you can be in different stages depending on the type of grief. So it's really allowing yourself some time to just process and work through. And you might not be able to process each of those layers at one time simultaneously. You might have to take one layer at a time.
Yeah. Thank you. And that's good information, because as you said, and it'll be interesting once you take one layer off to see what's under there. So as we said, with grief, it's a process, and it can be a very, very slow process.
Any other questions? Do you see any other questions?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Wait a little longer, but I just want to, thank everyone who did come on, and I hope this has been helpful, because as I said, as time goes on, we're going to find ourselves in a lot of different situations that we are going to need to deal with. But again, I think it's really important for us to be able to recognize our emotions and learn how to deal with them as effectively as we can. And then to be able to, as I said, reach out. And something that Dr. Tinsley said, I think is really, really important. Each of us have to take care of ourselves, whatever that is, to replenish what has been lost in us emotionally. As I said, taking a walk, being with people, talking, dancing, do that self-care, because that does and will make a difference as we continue this journey, because it's going to be a journey, as we continue this journey with each other. So I really want to emphasize that at this point. I don't see any more comments.
Yeah.
I thank everyone who stayed online. I hope that the information was helpful. Again, if you have any more questions or want information, as I said, the Mount Ararat Baptist, the Mount Ararat counseling session is available. You can give them a call there and leave information, and one of the therapist counselors will get in contact with you.
And then I just want to say thank you so much, Kathleen. This was great information. This was timely, and this is definitely an area that we need to continue to focus on, especially with the different types of losses that people have experienced and will continue to experience as a result of the two pandemics.
Yes. Well, thank you, Dr. Tinsley.
Yes. Thank you, everyone who joined us today. And please keep a lookout for additional webinars that we will be providing virtually as part of the Mount Ararat Counseling Center. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Joyce.